Welcome back. Still the morning brief right here on Channels Television. We're now switching gears, but we're still talking products and things that concern our economy, and which is why we will be talking about the issue of crude oil production in Nigeria. And we can't do this all by ourselves. Of course, Kayode, I will leave this to you exactly to run through it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's talk to Dr. Ayodele Oni. This concerns everybody, by the way, but, you know, the experts have their view, they have the details, the figures, the regulations, and the rest. So we're joined on the program by Dr. Ayodele Oni, who is a commercial lawyer, energy law and policy, and partner Energy Practice Group, Bloomfield LP. Good morning, Dr. Oni. Thank you for joining us on the morning brief.
Thank you very much for having me.
You know, I was looking at a report, I think it was by the Daily Trust, talking about Nigeria grappling with meeting its oil production targets for 10 years now. So that's talking about budgets that are underfunded. We always have all of these budget, predictions and predications, but it's been tough to meet them. And it looks like we're going down that road yet again. There's been lots of legislations. We thought the PIA was going to be that game changer. Well, how much of the game it is changing is left out there to the jury to decide. But when you now look at the FX situation, and it's said that, well, it's obviously because we're not producing. What was very easy for us to produce before oil is now even tough, even though all we're doing is just drilling and exporting. So I wonder, for you as an expert in that field, you understand the legal framework and, of course, the economic angle, the operations as well. What do you see as the major challenge here, really?
Okay, I think challenges are historical. It's not today. First, we've had regulatory uncertainty. You know, business people would rather invest where you have bad laws, but you have certainty, you have clarity. For over 10 years, the issue of the Petroleum Industry Bill, which is now an act, was in play. There were situations where they said, oh, the law was going to be passed in piecemeal. No one was sure what the fiscal regime was. Because when you invest in a country, you want to be sure how you recover your investment. So if the fiscal, FISCAL toolbox is unclear, then you'd have limited investment. And recall that the government cannot do it alone. Government started with concessions, then moved to joint venture arrangements, then copied the Indonesian model for production sharing contracts so that the oil companies will take the risk. And when they find oil, we will share production and profits as a country with them. But we were relying on the Petroleum Act, and there was a lot of media attention and government attention around changing that law to a new one for over 10 years. So no one was investing because I wouldn't risk my capital when I'm not sure I'm going to get that money back. That's one of the problems. And another problem has been the problem of theft and metering. I mean, and this is neither here nor there. You would hear blames from government. You would also hear from the private sector. You know, there were issues around a lot of theft happening and people even shutting in. People would rather shut in and not produce than produce. And between the point of production and the terminal, the export terminal, they lose a lot of crude. I'm sure you did see on social media about 2 years ago when the group chairman of Hess Holding mentioned that they were losing a large percentage of crude that they were producing. So those are challenges you will see. Lack of certainty for a long time. And remember, oil production activities have long lead times. So even if you have a new law, things are not just going to change immediately. People need to take final investment decisions. They need to do the analysis based on that new law. They even need to understand the new law. They need to understand how the taxation will work, royalties, how the split of government take and private sector take will work. So those have, in my view, been the major challenge, particularly the uncertainty and theft.
One other concern, you've raised it in passing. We're going to throw those data later on the program as much as possible, but we're looking at a situation where we'll think differently to make sure that everybody's on the table when you talk about vandalism and illegal crude oil theft, which is illegal, by the way. But when I look at the provision of the Constitution, which is under the legislative list, the 39th item, talks about everything that is natural resources and all of that, including oil, belongs to the federal government. But we've seen under other administration where we have the presidential advisory, something, I forgot it, the Presidential Artisanal Gold Mining Initiative, which incorporates miners in the northern part of the country to be like they get these things and then the government acts like an off-taker for them. Can't we model that in the Niger Delta region to reduce the level of theft because the numbers are huge? It's at industrial scale, so that we can ramp up our numbers in terms of production.
Okay, so that's a good point. But you'd have to also appreciate that the politics of oil and gas are drastically different from mining, generally speaking. And like you've rightly mentioned, both mining and oil and gas are under the exclusive legislative list, and it's within the purview of the federal government to make legislation. But it's not as simplistic, because recall, when you have oil and gas, you have what they call post-government contracts. The way you deal with oil and gas separate from how you deal with other mineral resources. And even the legal regimes are different. You have the Mining Act for mining other than petroleum. And for petroleum, recall that you're not talking about only liquids. You have natural gas. You understand? You have both liquid, you have the gaseous. But when you speak to mining, you also have to understand the historical approaches to both items. So you can't exactly deal with them the same way. And underneath, you have a licensing regime, which is quite different from mining. There are areas of convergence, but they are largely different, especially because of the politics of oil and gas. That's a universal concept. You know, we're members of OPEC, for example. You have what is your technically allowable output. You know, you have what your quota is. So those factors also impact oil and gas. Now, I think what government has tried to do, there's been a lot of illegal mining happening. And you know, these go to our balance of trade and balance of payment to the extent that there's a lot of illegality in terms of mining and sale. It then means government loses a lot of revenue, particularly foreign denominated revenue, which could have played a role in improving the strength of our currency and reducing the pressure on the naira, generally speaking. So I think because of these issues, they wouldn't necessarily work the same way. For example, for a long time, government at some point had joint ventures. You could compare it to what they've done with gold. But government could not even meet its cash call obligations. That's why gradually government started to move towards production sharing contracts where there were no cash call obligations. The contractor, one of the international oil companies in particular, will take all of the risk, spend all of the money. It's only when they make money. That's different from what you see in mining. You know, in terms of volume, value of cash, the structure of the market internationally. I think those mean that they cannot necessarily be treated the same way.
Ms. Oni, perhaps you could take us through the politics of refining at home as well from the international community. And I'm referring to the report from about late last year that 67 oil refining licenses were lying dormant. Besides that, there is also Walter Smith Refinery, there is Aradel Refinery, there is Boa Refinery. Let's say that we're waiting for Dangote Refinery, and perhaps in a few months we would start seeing products from there. But what about all these other refineries? When are we going to begin to scoop the gains from the licenses issued to these refineries? And those 67 inactive licenses, what questions should we begin to ask the NMDPRA about their capacity?
Okay, thank you very much. A number of these refineries are already producing, but the thing around modular refineries a lot of people miss is that, and our key challenge in this part of the world has been PMS, what we call petrol, not so much around diesel, save for pricing. It's been petrol. When you have scarcity, it's petrol. Many of these refineries modular refineries cannot get to the point of producing PMS. They'll stop at naphtha. Why? there's a particular equipment that you need to add to your refinery to be able to reach that point of distilling for refining PMS, or otherwise you stop at naphtha. And that equipment is very expensive. This is technical now. That equipment is expensive, that if you don't produce or you don't refine up to a particular volume, then your project is not going to be bankable. Bankability means no one's going to lend you money to be able to do your project. So that's one of those challenges. Bankability of many of these refineries. One, would they be able to find crude to refine? Do they have sufficient contracts? Because recall, it's not sufficient for you to get a license. You need to be able to get funds to build. And you know, energy and the energy sector requires a lot large financing. Usually, in many cases, you would have project finance, or you would have receivables financing, forward sale arrangement, those sort of arrangements. But if you can't show your source, you can't show that you can produce profitably. And one thing about refining, it thrives on efficiency. So I think it goes beyond licensing. I know what your next question may be. Weren't all of this considered prior to issuing licenses? Recall that it's a chicken and egg thing. If you don't have your license, no one will then give you financing. But if you then do get your licensing and there is no certainty of your products, of the crude itself, or whatever else you are going to refine, then you still do not get financing and your project gets stuck. So it's not sufficient to get licensing. You need to have a structure, a project structure that works, right advisors. Do you have even off-take arrangements? All of these are important. And then it then goes to the issue around subsidy for a long time. The financiers are then asking you, prospective lenders are asking you how you are going to be able to get your revenue regularly at set times, because you have periods within which you have to pay back that financing. So many of the challenges we have, apart from uncertainty around the laws for a long time, has been inability to raise financing, lack of bankability of those projects, and at times the misunderstanding many people have around doing some of these projects. So it's not sufficient that you have your license. You need to be able to think through the process, your contracting, your funding, your offtake arrangement, your base product which you will be refining. I think those have been some of the issues why we haven't seen some of these products, some of these refineries come up. I know Aradel is doing quite well. I also think understand that the Walter Smith is doing well, and it's quite integrated. I think they've got their own crude, and they are then able to refine.
Well, I wonder if you can.
It's largely bankability for me.
Right. I wonder if you can predict my next question, Dr. Oni, because you seem to be seeing these questions coming. But speak to this point. When we all talk about the oil industry, the conversation is closely tied to FX. Just recently, the CBN governor talked about forex inflows now coming to the CBN. It says it's working with the Ministry of Finance and NNPCL to ensure this happened. Now, there have been reactions. Presidential candidate of the PDP saying, well, this is illegal. We've seen other people saying, well, this is the way to go. I know there's still that ongoing debate, but the way the Naira is going right now, the CBN governor says one of the reasons, or one of what they see as this stabilizing factor, is a reduction in importation of finished products, particularly petrol. Bukola has raised a question about the refineries. So there's a lot of hope that is resting on the shoulders of these refineries. Well, some will say it's a business at the end of the day. But do you see us, or do you think that's the right way to go, to keep hoping? Because some say it might not happen in 2024. It might take 2025, because they might not even start with petrol and all of that. So what do you see as a future?
Okay, what I see as the future is when Nigeria becomes a scenario where Nigeria becomes a net exporter of finished products. I think that there's been a lot of, and I'm not holding forth for government, there's been a lot of neglect for several years. So you don't expect that policies will immediately begin to bring about positive change or result. It takes a while to build a refinery, depending on what size, and that number of that duration would depend on the complexity and financing. Ability to be able to raise financing. So, in terms of our forex, I think it's a fair point the CBN governors made. For example, Q3 last year, we spent almost 2 trillion just importing, in one quarter, importing petroleum products. And it meant that we had to chase USD with the Naira we did have. So imagine that stops. We produce sufficient crude and we're able to refine. That will reduce the pressure on the Naira. I'm not saying that will be necessarily very substantial, but it will play a role. There's no silver bullet to this thing. It's different parts coming together, being more productive as a country, ensuring that our
Pardon me,
food
Dr.
is
Oni. My question also is, can that happen this year?
Okay, I was going to get there. I think it can happen this year, but I suspect it will be closer to the end of the year.
Okay.
The question will be, why is that?
Yes.
Why that far-flung?
Okay, so there are already a number of issues around even the crude itself, right? Ability to get the volumes we require. So a number of companies are looking to do more, produce more, because government has the NNPC does have a number of forward sale arrangements, contracts is entered into in the past. That's one thing. Secondly, when you build refineries such as the Dangote or do a turnaround maintenance, you have your mechanical completion and you still have a process of testing and commissioning before you get to the point of then properly refining. And also, when you refine petroleum products, you refine them at different fractions. You may start with the heavier until you then get to PMS, and I suspect that that's what the Dangote refinery wants to do. So it's also technical. It's not something you just wish. There is a process you will have to follow to get to that point, and I think that's why it's the case. We're already almost midway into the first quarter. So if we haven't started now, you won't get into PMS this quarter at least.
It's sometimes when it comes to the conversation around oil and gas, I suspect there's a lot of mysticism sometimes. So we ask questions and trying to walk around those questions. But let's come back to some things that if we work on correcting, because for me, it looks like there's complicity across board, allegedly, because of the level and the scale. Let me read out some data for you, and you will respond to this, how we can bring this down, taper it down as much as possible. The NNPCL Group CEO was at the National Assembly, and he said 4,800 illegal connections are on our pipelines. 4,800. He says for every 100 kilometer, there are about 300 insertions. And then for stolen crude, this is from NATE, between 2009 and 2020, about almost over 600 million barrels valued at $46 billion were stolen. Pipeline vandalism between 2017 to 2021 came to about over 7,000. These are industrial scale thefts. There is no explanation that there are no complicity, maybe across board. How do we manage this before we begin to talk about the ambitious big dreams of all of these refineries going? Let's solve our in-house problem in terms of housekeeping. What do you think can be done?
Okay, I think it's about... So Nigeria has some of the best laws in the world, some of the best policies in the world. The problem is implementation. The problem is equality. The problem is fairness and applying the laws fairly. When you find out that people are complicit, if you just hit them by the wrist and let them go, someone else is going to try it. But if there are serious repercussions for doing some of this, so it's not so much about law, policy, technical. No, it's about doing what you need to do. It's about punishing people that need to be punished. It's about applying the law equally or the laws equally, fairly, without fear or favor. That's what I think the answer is. Nigeria is not about the problem isn't policies or laws. We have some of the best laws in the world. It's just whether we implement them. So I think the buck stops with the government, particularly with the presidency, to do what needs to be done and to get that done quickly. And I think that's what it is. It's not much more. Whether you want to use drones, whether you want to do more energy management systems, SCADA. You'll be able to detect remotely. All of that is government. The military, the guys who enforce those things. And if people get caught, then they should be punished. That's what it is.
Mr. Oni, amid that staggering data that Jeffrey has just, enumerated for us, we also find locals involved in illegal refining crude, and the former River State governor, had cause to rein in on quite a lot of activities of the locals during his tenure. In recent times, too, the Navy has been doing a lot of work in that area. But regardless of the efforts of clamp down on illegal crude refining by the locals, it speaks to a certain degree of a local capacity. What can be done to harness that potential, perhaps on a small scale, such that the people can be empowered and we can standardize the process and reduce the pollution, the continuing pollution of the Niger Delta area?
I think you've answered some of your own questions. Provide training. Provide, and I think it's even a broader fiscal and economic issue. Right. I think that if some of these guys are brought in, and the Local Content Act, for example, the Nigerian Oil and Gas Content Development Act is implemented properly, some of these will reduce, because the Act makes provisions around employment, around capacity development, and all of this, and around reserving funds for development of those areas. So I think all of this should be done within a broader fiscal economic arrangement. It's not sufficient, and like I did state, we have good laws, we have good regulations.
Right.
Set up institutes, bankroll some of these guys, provide financing for them.
Right.
If people have capacity or competence, you just need to be able to channel same to more useful endeavors and useful ends. Even some of these refineries, maybe there may be an arrangement to even merge them. I mean, some people say they are not even refining, right? But you can provide the technological support that is required. We just need to ensure that and one thing I think we've always missed in this part of the world is combining the academia with some of this. If you go to Silicon Valley, you'd find out that, and I can't remember the name of that university, it's an Ivy League university, provides support to Silicon Valley. Well, so when government does have some of these policies, get the academia from universities, get the academia to support, get students.
Right.
So some of these guys, you just need to be able to bring some of these things together, some of what they refer to as refineries, together and have a system.
Quite an important point you made there about collaboration. There's still the elephant in the room. We focus a lot on crude oil and the rest, but then there's a power sector as well. It makes up all of our energy mix, if I can use that term. The power sector, there's already been a collapse this year. I wonder if you're surprised or not. But because of time, I'd like you to just take 30 seconds to address that situation, the power grid collapses. Is there a solution to that? So we won't have, like, every month one grid collapse or the other, Dr. Oni?
Yes, we've had over 222 grid collapses in the last 12 years. It's simple. Technical issues, poor management. There should be an energy management system that would include a supervisory control and data acquisition system. I hear that's going on. Also, we need to have spinning reserves. This is what happens. When you have power, it's like a pipe, or water pipe, or a water hose. If water leaves and there's pressure, if pressure drops on one end, it then falls. That's what happens. So when you say you have 4,000 megawatts and one or two key power plants leave the grid, it will collapse. Right. So one, you need to ensure that you have what is known as a spinning reserve. That's power plants that can immediately kick in once one goes off. One, two, we need to constantly maintain our infrastructure. I think those are two critical things we need to do. Maintenance and ensure that we have a spinning reserves and also an energy management system. And I understand that the TCN is working on that. I know that there is a contract and deployment is going on. I think that in the next 1 year or so, it will become, if not something of the past, it will be a very rare occurrence.
Well, it reminds me of that song by Sound Sultan. When we ask our government when they'll give us light, they said 2010. You've given us 1 year now. That's 20. That's 2025. Well, it was 2010 then. Now it's 2025. Dr. Ayodele, thank you so much for giving us some insight into this particular issue around energy. He's a commercial law, energy law and policy, as well as partner, commercial lawyer, I should say, as well as partner, energy practice group, Bloomfield LP. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Oni.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, we'll go to break now. When we return, we talk to one of those reality TV stars that you've seen on your screens on social media. Yeah, it's on the lighter side. That's in a moment. Join us again.